Good morning, friends, and welcome to a Hasty Podcast. I'm your international man of mystery, Weston Hasty, and you're listening to a Hasty Podcast. I didn't think of that ahead of time. I had to think about it. Oh, my coffee today. You have your coffee? Do you have your coffee this morning? No? Are you more of a tea person? You weirdo. No. I took a week off of everything last week. I didn't do bugger all for anything, the podcast, my YouTube channels. I didn't do any of my, it's really my side stuff, right? I didn't do any of that stuff last week. So let's just pretend that last week was definitely 2 weeks ago when I was doing stuff, and pretend that last week was just nothing. It didn't happen. You definitely didn't miss a week of podcasts or anything like that. Definitely didn't happen. What I will say, what did happen last week that I'm not covering today, but what did happen is E3 week. It was E3 week last week. I didn't watch or read or listen about any of it whatsoever, which I should have, but I was busy doing other IRL things all last week. I don't know. All last week I was working. I'm a working man. I had my day job to attend to, of course. And then several of the nights throughout the week I spent out and about with friends or otherwise out in the town, and not really doing anything at home, like watching E3 or anything like that. And the people I hang out with, IRL, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, but the people that I hang out with in IRL, they're not the nerdy kind that like watch the E3s or talk about video games. I know, I get it. You're probably like, oh, Weston, you let's play video games on YouTube and stream and do a lot of video game-based content. You're kind of a gamer nerd or something. Surely you have other gamer friends that you hang out with. They're not available in person. All those friends are all over the goddamn country. So I don't hang out with them in person as much as I would like to. So the people I hang out with in person are more interested in like going and getting drinks and stuff like that, right? So I was very busy all last week and didn't keep up with E3 whatsoever, although later on in the week, hopefully, I'm going to do some research and look into some of the bigger news that has come out. I've heard little tidbits of things, but I want to do some more looking in to see what I missed and discuss some whatever catches my attention on the podcast and just kind of give you my take on it. Although by the time you hear it here on the podcast, it will be old news, but hopefully you find it interesting anyway, coming from me. Maybe, I don't know if you're interested in this podcast, maybe you're interested in my take on whatever news there is to be had. So that's coming up this week. Hopefully, probably. So last week was E3, but we're not talking about that today. As I said at the onset of this podcast, today I'm your international man of mystery, and I chose that. I don't know what I'm titling and thumbnailing this episode of the podcast, so maybe you've already guessed it. I'm going to say you've quite possibly already guessed that today we're talking a little bit about Austin Powers, which, I mean, only kinda. We're going to talk about it a little bit. Last night, because I'm recording this podcast right on the heels of having witnessed this movie. Last night, I watched a movie. I watched Austin Powers International Man of Mystery, which is the first Austin Powers movie. And it's not the first time I had seen it, but the first time I had seen it, I was quite young. I don't know how young I was. So the movie, Austin Powers International Man of Mystery, is a film that came out in 1997 as a parody film to like the James Bond films. Basically, that's kind of the idea. And I wasn't sure which one, actually. I opened up Wikipedia just to like look for some background info or whatever. And I think they said that specifically, where did I read this? Specifically, the first movie kind of, I guess, takes more leads from Diamonds Are Forever from James Bond, which off the top of my head, I don't remember if I've seen that one. I've seen several James Bond films. I've not seen all of them by any stretch of the imagination. There are a lot. I didn't look that little factoid up, but there are a lot of James Bond films. I am a big fan of James Bond. Since I was a kid, I loved spy stuff. I loved spy stuff as a kid, and I remember watching James Bond movies, and I don't know which ones, but I remember watching James Bond movies as a kid and missing probably a tremendous deal of the minutia, the details of the films. But I loved the suave spy and the action and the gadgets and that kind of thing. The James Bond womanizing all the ladies in his life didn't really mean much to me as a kid, but as far as like suave spy and gadgets and espionage and that kind of stuff, I was really into that stuff. When I was much younger, there was this line of toys. I don't remember what it was called, but it was something generic, like, I don't know, Kid Spy or something. I don't remember, but there was this line of toys that was like different gadgets and stuff for kids to play with, and I don't remember what they all were. There were all kinds of weird little toy gadget things you could do. Several of them involved having like microphones or tiny video cameras you could put around like the house and for surveillance or something. And I think there was some different, I don't even remember them super well, but I was into them as a kid. I'm not really making it sound like I was into them because I'm not really describing them very well, but I have such a poor memory. I have such a poor memory of anything that I used to do as a child. It's actually quite aggravating. Because I try to look back and be like, oh yeah, back when I was a kid, I remember this, that, and the other. And honestly, I should remember things, but my memory is so bad for anything that happened to me as a child. Like, I've met people, this is a complete side tangent. I have met people that can claim that they like remember things from when they were like 2 or 1. I don't know if I believe that, because that I can't remember things from when I was 7. How do you remember things? I don't remember being 2. If you told me that I was birthed out of a vat of like acid or something at the age of 8 or something, right? I started at 8. I would have to believe you. But yes, spies. I was really into spies. So, needless to say, Austin Powers International Man of Mystery came out in 97. Now, I would have been like, what month was it in 97? May. So I wasn't even quite 4 yet, all right? So I don't think I watched this movie for the first time at 4. Because I feel like I remember watching Austin Powers, at least Goldmember. Goldmember's the one that I remember the most. And that's the third movie. But of course that makes more sense because that's 2002. You know, I was like 9-ish. So like I said, anything before 7 years old, I really doesn't stick with me. So I'm guessing I must have watched Austin Powers between the ages of like 6 and 8 or something. Maybe we watched it on VHS or something before the third movie came out. We didn't watch any, I say we, because I was so young that it was me and my family watched it, these movies, which is kind of funny because they're not particularly child appropriate, but like also they're not vulgar. We'll get into that here in a sec. But I'm guessing we watched them, definitely not in theaters. I think we watched all of them at home, so they must have all been on VHS. So I'm guessing we probably didn't watch these things until like 2003 or 4 or something like that. Probably, I'm guessing. So around that age, maybe. I don't know. And I remember enjoying Austin Powers and thinking it was funny, but more for the fact that Austin Powers, the character, is like such a goofy character, and he speaks in his weird like 60s, yeah, baby, nonsense that probably spoke to my child brain, I guess, at the time. And of course, like I said, I was into spy stuff. So he was like a spy or whatever, and yeah, he was goofy, but like he was like winning, right? So like he was suave enough, especially, you know, he'd get the ladies, he'd have the gadgets, he had the less suave but more humorous or something. I don't know. All the elements were there, but in parody form to like the James Bond stuff that I had seen before, which I'm sure was very fun because this is supposed to be funny as opposed to serious. And yeah, I watched that last night. I watched Austin Powers last night. It's not a vulgar movie in my opinion, but it also came out, 2 decades ago. So I I don't know, what would have been considered crass at the time has changed. It's got some swearsies in it. It's got some swearsy words in it for sure. But I definitely feel like if you showed it to a kid today, it really wouldn't be that bad. And by kid, I mean probably like 10 or whatever, right? Because I think a lot of the sexual innuendo might go over their head anyway, so that doesn't really matter too much. Other than like literally the scene where these robot, like, what did the movie call them? Femme Dolls or something like that? They're like these robot sex dolls that were built to what's the word I'm looking? Seduce Austin Powers and then I guess kill him. They did a really bad job of it, but they had these like guns that came out of their like bras. They had these like tit cannons, right? that murdered an entire gang of police officers when the dolls were introduced, but for some reason they didn't use the guns when they met Austin Powers. They had like a weird knockout gas or seduction gas. Again, there's a scene where Dr. Evil's son, what's his name, Scott, in the movie, he's played by what's his face from Robot Chicken. Hang on, I have the Seth Green. Anyway, what was I about to say? Oh, there's a scene where Scott, Dr. Evil's son, mentions like we can end Austin Powers. I've got a gun. I can shoot him now and it would be over. And Dr. Evil's like, no. That's not how we do things here. And that's very clearly the case. I'm making fun, of course, of the old James Bond movies where every evil villain had to have some absurd, arbitrary way of ending James Bond as opposed to like shooting him. You know, Shark Tanks and the such. It's a good movie. If you haven't seen Austin Powers, I'm probably not doing a good job of describing it. I do recommend you see it. It's funny. But it is like wrapped in late 90s atmosphere? I don't know. It's definitely like a movie of its time in many ways, especially with the... I don't know, because it's a parody movie. So I want to say it's a movie of its times, but it's also aware of itself with the, I don't know, like taking it. I'm trying to think, like, I had this thought last night after watching the movie where I was wondering to myself, would this movie stand up if it were released today? Right? Because so much of it's wrapped in 60s anyway, because Austin Powers is taken from 1967. He's cryogenically frozen for 30 years, and the movie takes place in 1997. So he's ripped right out of the 60s and plopped into, at the time, would have been modern times. And the 90s isn't, I think, so far removed from today. This might be my own bias, because I'm from the 90s. But I don't think the 90s is so far removed from today that the movie itself couldn't work if it were like randomly released today. A lot of the differences between the 90s and today in terms of the movie, I think, are the technology aspect. Like there's like a laptop and that is hilariously terrible, and like a flip phone, and you know, just technology aspects, and like cars and stuff. Like obviously technology is advanced. But in many ways, because the 90s part of the movie is meant to contrast the 60s that Austin Powers comes from, because you're looking at those differences on the nose, I think it would work even today. The part that had me like concerned really was like the treatment of women in the film, if that would be okay if released today, because, you know, the entire sort of purpose of basically every female character in the movie, with the exception of, I can't think of her name, but one of the right-hand women of Dr. Evil. I can't think of her name right now. She's the head of the militant branch of the Salvation Army. I remember her title. I don't remember her name. I think they mention it once, maybe twice. It's toward the beginning of the movie, and I can't remember. But besides her, like every other woman is basically a sex object in the movie, because the women around Austin Powers, because Austin Powers is supposed to be playing off that James Bond womanizing aspect, he's trying to get with them. And then, like, again, the other women on, like, Dr. Evil's side is the evil secretary who Austin Powers is supposed to get information out of by seducing her, basically. So, like, That's her entire purpose. The Femme Dolls are like literally sex bots, right? So like every woman in the movie is basically a sex object. Which, if you made a movie where that is the situation today, that's not okay. But it's also a parody movie, so it's not like the movie doesn't know that. It's intentional, and everyone knows it. I don't know. So I was thinking about that last night. Like, would this movie work today? And that's especially poignant to me because I do remember hearing a while ago that there were rumors that they were going to try to make, I don't know who the they is, Hollywood, I guess. I don't know. Mike Myers himself, who, by the way, I didn't mention. Mike Myers is the guy who wrote the original trilogy. I don't know if he wrote all of it, obviously. Probably had a team, but wrote it and also acted in it. He played Dr. Evil and Austin Powers, both. Which is funny to me because when I was younger, watching the movies, I didn't realize he played both Dr. Evil and Austin Powers. So he had me fooled. Well done. Bravo. But where was I going with this? Yeah, I was just thinking about that last night. I'm like, would this movie work today? And I was thinking about that because I remember hearing rumors that there was a fourth one, maybe in the works or in the talks, or maybe they were writing it. I don't know what stage it's getting to. It was rumors. It was rumors. I don't know how much of it was true anyway. But that's why I bring that up. It's like, would it work? Would it work today? And having watched the first movie myself, I would say I think you could watch it today and still enjoy it. I think there's some outdated jokes here and there, but a lot of it is so like physical comedy. Like they have like 3, I think, whole scenes of just Austin Powers being naked, and like as he moves around a room or whatever, something else is happening on screen, a phone call or whatever, something else is happening on screen, and while Austin Powers is moving around naked, something keeps happening to just barely be hiding his junk. So like, just to give you an idea of the comedy here, there's a lot of physical comedy, and then there's also a lot of just awkward comedy. I don't know what the kids would call it these days, cringe comedy. Like the scene where the evil people laugh that you see in like every movie that has some sort of supervillain ever, if it's a superhero movie or old James Bond movie or whatever, where the evil laugh, right? You know, there's a scene where the evil team do their evil laugh, and where you would expect the movie to cut and transition to the next thing, the scene just holds out, and they have to just like keep laughing, doing their evil laugh for like a solid 60 seconds or however long it went, which is a long time that's a lot of screen time to be holding out a laugh until like the laugh subsides and dies, and they're just all kind of standing there looking at each other awkwardly because what do you do after that? So like it's got that like kind of cringe comedy. I don't know if that's what we should call it. I don't know. What do you call that? It's got that cringe comedy. It's got that physical humor. It's got a lot of that. It's got a lot of sexual innuendo in that sort of comedy as well. I think it works. I think it, weirdly enough, holds up today. And I don't know. I recommend, without giving away too much of it, which I don't know if you can really spoil this movie. It's literally from 97. It's 24 years old, right? Yes. I had to think about that, right? It's about 24-ish years old. It is an old film now. I want to watch 2 and 3 again as well, and watch those and kind of compare and contrast a little bit. Don't know when I'm going to get around to that, but I enjoyed it. And I was watching it last night. I was going to mention this earlier. I'll mention it now. I was watching it last night. We were all together on Alex, who's guest appeared on the podcast before. I've mentioned him several times on the podcast. Alex Duquette, he's my buddy from school from many years ago. We both do YouTube stuff together sometimes, and you know, we stay in touch. And I support his YouTube channel over on Patreon. He has a Patreon, as well as I have one as well. Should I shout both of us out real quick? If you want to check out my Patreon and help support the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/Weston Hasty and support me there. I'm actually trying to look up right now. Hang on. I'm so not used to going to other people's Patreon pages on web. I usually look at it from my phone. How do I get to Alex's? Okay, yeah. I thought this was his. If you want to check out Alex's Patreon, it's patreon.com/Alex Duquette. There we go. I thought that's what it was. And if you go to his Patreon and you support him there, you get access to his secret Patreon Discord, that I believe he has connected for his Patreon supporters as well as his YouTube members, supporters, maybe even his Twitch subscribers, because he does Twitch now. I don't remember who all has access to his Discord, but you get access to his super secret Discord where you can hang out, chat, but also, like, monthly, I think is what he does, once a month. I hadn't been able to catch one until this month, until just yesterday. He holds a sort of movie night with his supporters. And they all agreed on watching Austin Powers, and I happened to be available for a couple hours, and I'm like, I want to go watch Austin Powers with the guys. So I hung out with Alex as well as a couple of his several. How many of them were there? Like 6 or so of his supporters. It was a cool little movie hangout night where we watched the movie, laughed at some of the stuff going on screen, talked whatever. It was a good time, and I enjoyed it very much, and it made me think more about like how, as a fellow creator to Alex, I also want to do stuff like that. I don't know about movie nights or not. I think that would maybe be cool. I don't know. We'll see in the future. But it got me thinking more about what I could do for Patreon supporters and YouTube members and that kind of thing. I'm pretty low key when it comes to like if you support me on any of those financial ways. I don't do a ton. In terms of like reward tiers and stuff like that, I don't do a lot. I would like to change, like I would like to figure out like what kind of things people would like to see or do or interact with. That sort of thing. It's something I think about as a creator with not a lot of supporters. So it's not like there's a ton of support money to do like grandiose things in return. But the question becomes, what are the small things you can do as a creator that are cheap enough that, like, obviously you're still getting something out of the support people are giving you? Because after all, that's the point, right? You're probably putting that money and funneling it into your creative endeavors. So you don't want to be spending all your support money on just giving back to your supporters, because the reason your supporters are supporting you are so that you can continue your creative endeavors. So obviously, what are the cheap, quick, and dirty and easy things you can do to give back the love and make it worth it for your supporters and that sort of thing? And I think about that, especially as a smaller creator, someone who doesn't have a ton of supporters and a ton of money coming in, like what you can do. Like the movie night thing. It would be one thing if you had, say you're a creator as well, and you just started your Patreon or your YouTube memberships or whatever, and you get your first supporter, and if you don't know them super well, like maybe you're not a streamer and you don't talk to them all the time, because a lot of my supporters I chat with on stream. But if you're not like that, then like a movie night might not make sense if you have like 1 or 2 or whatever, some small number of supporters, because if you're not in constant communication with them, you could try to hold like a movie night and then no one shows up. And while like that's always a risk, you also don't want to, as a creator, be like wasting your time doing something that no one shows up to, especially if you don't know if they don't show up because they're not interested. So you want to find something like what fits my audience. So like with Alex, a lot of his audience are into sort of retro things, especially from like the 90s and stuff. He does like a lot of medleys on his music channel that are older in nature, like old Nicktoon medleys and that sort of thing. His gaming Twitch, he does a lot of retro games from like the 90s on like old like Nintendo systems and that kind of thing. He's got kind of this retro feel to it. So like when we're watching Austin Powers from 97, it's kind of like a retro movie. So like it fits his theme, right? To do something like that. Whereas like someone like me, if I had a movie night, I can't immediately think of anything that fits my theme that is mostly variety modern gaming. Unless it was something like if I was doing a movie night, would I go out and look for video game based movies? But so many of those are old and retro now too. I don't know. It's just a thought I had. Of course, there's always the like streaming with members and that sort of thing, where you try to get together, like on a Discord, get a bunch of people together, play a game together, that kind of thing. But something that just something that got me thinking a little bit, going to this movie night with Alex and watching Austin Powers. I kind of went on a tangent there and was talking more about creative stuff rather than Austin Powers itself. But that's where my headspace was, I think, for the movie was. And you can't help it when you're a creator and you take part in something like this. You start thinking to yourself, how can I do this basically the same thing or something similar, but my way for my stuff? Got me thinking a bit about that. I also just as a little tidbit, if you've ever seen the Austin Powers movie, the famous line, I think it's famous, maybe it's not, where Dr. Evil asks for $1 million, because he's got like a nuke. He's going to send it to the center of the earth and blow up the volcanoes and then like wash the world in lava, unless the United Nations or whatever sends him $1 million. And, you know, everyone laughs because, you know, $1 million in 97 isn't that much money to be like demanding in exchange for not, you know, destroying the planet. And he's convinced to ask for 100 billion instead. I do want to point out that even, I had to look this up. This is just something that I thought was funny. Even in 1967 dollars, $1 million in 1967 dollars to today in 2021, not even 1997 when the movie came out, in 2021 with inflation is only a bit over $8 million in value. So even in 1967, asking for $1 million to not blow up the planet, basically, even then would have not been a tremendous amount of money. And I thought that was funny. I had to look that up. In 1997 money, $1 million would have been about like $4.8 million. So if you remember that fun scene, what would you ask? It's like, what would you ask for? Like, if your intent is send me money or I'll blow up the planet, basically, like, how do you decide what money to ask for? And then what would you do with that money? Right? It's going to be tracked. You know what I mean? I mean, I know it's a parody movie, so it's not supposed to make sense, but if you're really heck bent on destroying the planet, I don't think there's anything anybody can do to honestly, like, convince you to not. Honestly, if you think about it, if you think about reality, if there were a psycho, crazy, billionaire, eccentric, evil villain that wanted to destroy the planet, I don't think there's anything you can do to, like, convince them to not do that. I mean, you could try to stop them, obviously, but you can't, like, convince them to not do that. Because if they want money, what are they going to do with the money? They're on every wanted list ever, period, forever, right? Like, I don't know. I miss parody movies. Remember the scary movies that were like parodies off of various scary movies? I remember the scary movies, the Austin Power movies. I can't think of other parody movies off the top of my head. Get Smart was kind of a parody series. I think it was a TV show. Also for spy movie type stuff. I don't know if it was a parody series though, or more like a comedy series. I need to look some stuff up. I kind of miss parody movies. I feel like we don't see parody movies and series so much anymore. I could be wrong about that. If you know of any, I'd like to hear about any modern day parody stuff. I would almost argue that the Fast and Furious series is a parody on any action movie ever, but I mean, I don't think that counts at all, even remotely. Are there parody series and movies still out there being made to make fun of different genres and stuff? Let me know. Hit me up on my Twitter. You can use the hashtag Hasty Podcast and hit me up on Twitter at Weston Hasty to chat with me, leave me comments and questions and concerns or whatever. And if you do, we may just consider discussing them in a future podcast. So that's one way to communicate with me. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave me a comment down below. And if you're listening to this, of course, anywhere else, Spotify, etc., again, Twitter is probably your best bet. Or you can go over and give me a subscription over on YouTube. Give me a follow wherever you're listening to me. I don't know. These are all the things you can do to help support the podcast for free. Tell your friends about me and share the podcast with your friends and loved ones. Otherwise, if you'd like to support me financially, you can do so on patreon.com/Weston Hasty. This Wednesday, we will have a 10-minute bonus episode of the podcast. We have sort of an extension of the Hasty Podcast called Weston Wednesdays, where we just have a little extra snippet of the podcast where we talk about what's coming up with the podcast and future plans, behind the scenes, that kind of thing. So you can support me on Patreon. It's there for Patreon supporters. Otherwise, that's going to do it, I think, for this podcast. Once again, sorry for missing a week last week. Let's not do that again. But most importantly, thank you all so much for watching and listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do all the things. Until next time, I'm out of here. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and wash your hands. Bye!